Newcastle, Manchester City and Southampton were invited to join the secret meetings.
There was a feeling of discontent. This story of breaking away just wouldn't go away.
In 1988, the Football League celebrated its centenary. Maradona, Pelé, stars from the world of football joined in. But the talk behind closed doors was again of the moves being made by the big clubs to break away from the Football League. Early in January of that year, the Big Five, Spurs, Arsenal, Liverpool, Everton and Manchester United, were all invited by the Football League to attend a meeting at a hotel in St James's Street in London. The subject, TV rights. British Satellite Broadcasting, a new satellite channel, were making an offer to cover the English Football League.
And the management committee, I know, were gung-ho. They wanted to sign up with BSB. They thought it was a fantastic deal.
But the Big Five opposed it.
BSB literally was a pie in the sky.
Some people felt that whatever guarantees they gave, if they went bust along the way, that wasn't going to help.
It was not knowing how solid BSB were.
In 1988, Greg Dyke was director of programmes of LWT. He decided to try to sign up the Big Five clubs exclusively for ITV.
Morning, sorry we're late. The BSB offer had been accepted by all the clubs except one. The agreement had been made, and I set about unpicking it. We only wanted the big clubs. The idea was we'd buy their football rights separately from the Football League and we'd let BSB could have the rest.
He said that he was prepared to offer each club £750,000.
We nearly fell off our chairs.
And suddenly, we were being offered the type of money that we believed football was really worth.
At another meeting, I then said, look, I tell you what we will do. We will give you all £1 million each. And the sort of eyes bulged.
Total turnover of Arsenal Football Club was £1.5 million, and here is somebody offering us £1 million per a season.
ITV's offer to the top teams was now extended to embrace 18 First Division clubs. The news caused uproar at Football League headquarters.
Any deal which they wish to reach for televising matches must, by virtue of the league regulations, come back to the Football League Management Committee.
Lee Walker was the league's head of broadcasting.
The general reaction was panic because at that time it was a family feel to the whole league. It was the family breaking up.
The 12 clubs, including Liverpool, Manchester United, Spurs and Arsenal, stand to make far more money by accepting ITV's offer.
ITV offered the Football League £44 million over the next 4 years, £11 million a year.
It was the beginning of the realisation for the rest of football that actually the economic clout lay with a small number of clubs.
But with one exception, the other Football League clubs had already voted for the BSB deal.
You had clubs to convince that what they'd originally agreed was wrong and what you were putting forward was right.
Yes, it was not easy. We had to, as they say, you can't make an omelette without breaking some eggs. We broke a lot of eggs at the time.
The Big Five argued forcefully that the newcomers, BSB, might not be viable, whereas ITV were established and rich.
The real catalyst of it was the bankrolling. Would the clubs actually receive money for the years to come? That put the skids, I think, under a lot of clubs and their confidence in the deal.
So the clubs changed their minds, followed the Big Five's lead and voted for ITV. And the Big Five remained in the Football League. For the moment. On April 15th, 1989, 96 people died while watching a football match. Many more were crushed and maimed. It's hard to overestimate the impact of the Hillsborough disaster on the shape of football in England and Wales as it is today. At that time, Pat Smith was the Football Association's administration manager.
That weekend, Mark and I decided to go to Suffolk. Just about the time we got to the house, we put on the radio just to see what was happening with the FA Cup semi-final ties, and we heard that there'd been a big problem at Hillsborough.
Arsenal were playing Newcastle on that day, And of course then the pictures started coming through of what was going on at Hillsborough.
And the incident occurred 20 minutes ago as I speak now. And if anything, it's looked worse as every minute has gone by because...
It was just horrific, seeing people perishing at a football ground. It was a moment we'll never forget, and nor should we ever forget.
And we drove straight back to our apartment in West London, very close to Lancaster Gate.
I was at Wimbledon that day, and at half-time we went into the boardroom and the television was on and we were watching the events live. And it was horrifying.
Much conversation?
Silence.
It's something that you'll never forget.
It was a huge wake-up call to football.
The first thing we did on the Monday morning, all the grounds in the First Division had fences, and we removed the fences immediately.
People involved in the actual running of the game who had the responsibility for crowd safety realised that, you know, things had to change.
Then the politicians waded in.
Mrs. Thatcher was taken immediately to the Lepping Lane end of the ground, to the terracing where the fans died.
Margaret Thatcher wanted every fan to have an identity card. Football opposed it. So did the police. Graham Kelly, then Secretary of the Football League, was summoned to Downing Street.
We were called in to number 10 Downing Street. She couldn't, more likely wouldn't, publicly accept that football couldn't clean up its act. The Times, in an editorial, said that football was a slum sport, played in slum stadia, watched by slum people, and she took that viewpoint. My colleague Ted Croker, my predecessor at the FA, he said, "Hold on, Prime Minister." He said, "These are your hooligans who are ruining our game." Not many people said that to Mrs. Thatcher. She said, "Hold on, steady the buffs." I shrank a little lower in my seat. I thought, the handbag's coming out here.
Margaret Thatcher's attitude really was a desperation, if I may put it like that, because she really wasn't into football, didn't know very much about it, but for goodness sake, do something to clear this mess.
When people are dying, it has to stop.
The man who was given the responsibility of stopping it was Lord Justice Peter Taylor. Taylor was a football fan. He knew about football.
Good evening. Lord Justice Taylor's report on the Hillsborough disaster, in which 95 people died, amounts to the longest and most detailed indictment of British football ever made.
He said that the lessons of previous disasters had not been learned. Football, our national game, was blighted by old grounds, poor facilities, hooliganism, excessive drinking, and poor leadership. All those responsible for certifying, using and supervising the grounds should take a long, hard look at their arrangements. He made a number of recommendations. Among them, in the First Division and eventually the Second, all fans should have seats. But how was all this reconstruction going to be paid for? The government gave grants. So did some local authorities. And the FA pitched in with money. But
the bulk of the money that came into football was through television. And it was the television money that allowed the clubs to develop the grounds.
Television revenue had a major part to play in financing the improvements we needed to make to the game generally.
So television money, produced by ITV's agreement to pay English football £11 million a year, helped to make the ground improvements that Taylor wanted. By 1990, all First Division grounds were being changed to all-seater stadia. But the Big Five clubs were still unhappy. They could still be outvoted and outmanoeuvred by the other 87 clubs in the Football League. It was after the secret dinner on London's South Bank in November 1990 that the Big Five clubs determined to break away from the Football League.
David had always wanted to break away. There were only two things of meeting you. One, it was you wanted to break away, and secondly, it cost me another £1 million every time we had lunch. I remember that.
I remember it in St James.
David Dean and Noel White were delegated to take the message to the FA. They went there on December 6, 1990.
We left that dinner full of hope. As I was the only member of that five who was on the Council of the Football Association, it fell upon me to take the message to the Football Association. I went with a piece of paper. Felt like Neville Chamberlain.
To our absolute astonishment, we were greeted with open arms. We thought that, you know, there would be reservations, that they wouldn't be willing to entertain us. It was the opposite. They said, we think the time is right. Go ahead, propose something.
The man Dean and White saw was Graham Kelly, the same Graham Kelly who, for years, had worked for the Football League. Kelly was now Chief Executive of the Football Association.
Were you sympathetic to what they were saying?
Well, I was sympathetic to what they were saying, yes. Coincidentally, at that time, I was writing the FA's blueprint for the future of football, and the ideas that David, Dean and Noel White were coming forward with for a separate league of 18 clubs would fit ideally into our blueprint.
Once we'd seen the FA and we realised the door was a little bit ajar, that we could kick it open, we moved quickly. We had to.
But the Big Five were still not confident of success. 8 days later, on December 14th, Noel White noted, "Have we got the guts and determination steadfastly to fight the fight?" The Football League were furious with the FA at their support for the new elite Premier League. It would undermine the entire league, they declared.
There was a very genuine feeling of betrayal that they had sanctioned this breakaway.
On May 10th, 1991, the league's chief executive, Arthur Sanford, wrote angrily to the FA. He was dismayed at the FA's arbitrary and undemocratic attitude. The FA were railroading through the most significant change in football for the past century. 100 years of endeavour, he warned, were being put at risk for an illusion.
I didn't see the Premier League as an illusion. It was a very clear concept as far as I was concerned. We had to press ahead with it. It was the way forward. The Premier League was the way of the future.
Encouraged by the FA, the Big Five began to explore the practicalities of setting up the FA Premier League.
The clubs are facing major financial challenges from the Taylor report.
Rick Parry had masterminded the Manchester bid to host the Olympic Games. He was hired to ensure that this time the attempt to form an elite league would succeed. Early in 1991, in a series of meetings up and down the country, the Football Association and the Big Five clubs became united in their determination to set up a new elite Premier League. Newcomer Rick Parry, hired to push the concept through, first explored both their concerns.
There were concerns about players going abroad, such as David Platt, Des Walker, Paul Gascoigne, and how are our clubs going to compete in European competition.
And their vision of the future.
What became clear was there was actually a pretty strong consensus and a desire for change.
Parry and the Big Five tried to keep secret the meetings aimed at making the most momentous change in 100 years of English football.
The very first meeting I had with Graham Kelly, I said, well, I'll pop down to London. He said, no, don't do that. We've got to keep this secret.
I crept into a few hotel rooms on secret over a period of time around about that era.
I remember a meeting in Manchester where, because it was in Manchester and I booked the room, we booked it under Martin and Co.
If you're booking a room, it has to be Mr. Smith.
And as I said, I'm here to see Mr. Smith, the receptionist promptly said, oh, you're here for the Manchester United meeting.
Knowing the publicity that the opposition would have generated at the time, we just had to be as secretive as we could.
How on earth it kept quiet, I had not the faintest idea, but it did.
We just pressed ahead. We pressed ahead as firmly as we could.
But 5 teams don't make a league.
We knew we couldn't just break away with 5 of us and keep playing each other. We knew at some stage we had to bring the others into it.
The other teams the Big Five approached to join them were Aston Villa and Newcastle, Nottingham Forest, West Ham and Sheffield Wednesday. Yet the remaining 82 Football League clubs still didn't know what was going on.
We were in a league of 22, but we were in a bigger league of 92 in the Football League. So that was in itself a huge challenge, how we were going to convince the